The Tyranids are a hive mind, a collective of monsters and beasts that are all connected together by a psychic synaptic connection. Unlike with other armies in the 40k universe, they are all truly unified under the grand mind of the Tyranids, and act as fingers or tendrils of this greater entity, rather than as individual soldiers in its armies. When these parts of the grand Tyranid biomachine of war come together into a living armada of ships, they are known as a Hive fleet. These bands of Tyranids travel through the cold of space, stopping at each world they encounter to land, devour all biological life or nutrients on the planet, and then continue on, leaving the dry husk of a world behind them. Where these Hive fleets are but a splinter of the overall Tyranid might and a part of their greater whole, they operate self-sufficiently. Each of these fleets has developed differing techniques for dealing with the more resistant biomass that it encounters, each an experiment or prototype for the Tyranids as a whole to learn from and to adapt into. One common factor that stands for all Hive fleets, however, is the effect that their presence has when they near a system. The mass of psychic energies that binds each Tyranid to another creates an overlapping field of energy, one that blots out any less intense psychic mights. This shadow in the warp is typically the first warning bell of an incoming Hive fleet, and instills a passive dread into all who lie beneath it. Any chance at calling for help has passed, and the worlds must hope they are prepared enough and ready themselves to discover which Hive fleet has arrived to end them. With red skin and darker carapace, the creatures of Hive Fleet Behemoth have plagued humanity before the Imperium had even named the great menace the Tyranids. Earning the name for their race with the destruction of the planet Tyran, Behemoth then proceeded to march from a crag. Lacking in the stealth or subtlety that some fleets display, Hive Fleet Behemoth are typically categorized by their brutish and ferocious methods of slamming into enemy defenses with large, heavily armored war beasts, such as Carniflexes and Tyrannofexes. Even their ranged focused attacks come from heavy onslaughts of bioartillery, smashing up their targets just in time for their monstrous ground forces to barge through the enemy lines and continue on. When Hive Fleet Behemoth prepares a meal, they tenderize it fully before taking a bite. In stark contrast to this forward approach, the tactics of Hive Fleet Kraken are a tad more insidious. Spreading out and splitting into multiple smaller splinter fleets, Kraken introduced itself to the galaxy across multiple worlds at once. This organised, widespread strike spread the shadow of the warp across great wades of space, cutting off connections and potential calls for aid. Their pale skin and red carapace are identifiers for those who encounter the still present splinter fleets of Kraken. Springing from unexpected quarters, they surge through the slightest gap in their prey's defences, exploiting even the smallest of weaknesses with a surprising savagery. If Behemoth was the charging bull, then Kraken is the patient shark, circling their prey, awaiting a perfect moment to strike. Perhaps the most well-known Hive Fleet in the 40k fanbase, due to their part to play in the Third Tyrannic War and the devastation of Baal, Hive Fleet Leviathan remains the largest and most widespread fleet in the galaxy. Having learned from the lessons imposed onto the Tyranids in the first two wars against Behemoth and then Kraken, Leviathan's swarms are legion, and each carries knowledge of how their prey fights. Spread out across the galaxy, their synaptic connections are particularly strong. During the Grand Third Tyrannic War, the sheer unrelenting force of Leviathan saw them push through to the galactic centre, devouring worlds and entire systems as they knocked back defence after defence. It was only the opening of the Great Rift that saw an opportunity for defeating the Tyranids. A large portion of the Hive fleet was sucked into the gaping maw of the war, enough that the Imperial forces were able to push back the rest. Whilst they were shattered and their fleet separated, Leviathan still poses a great threat to all life in the galaxy, learning to face new enemies and adapting to a new way of warfare. They aren't the swiftest when it comes to adaptations, however. Hive Fleet Gorgon takes that particular trophy. Taking on the brunt of Gorgon's arrival, the Tau have had to develop new technologies and adapt their fighting styles to this new threat that they've been facing. Unlike most that the Tau come up against, however, the monsters of Hive Fleet Gorgon can match this rate of development, resulting in a tech versus biology arms race that sees the Tyranid of this fleet adapting from one attack wave to the next. The favoured weapons of these quick changes is biological in nature, specifically toxic spores. Capable of bypassing rebreathers and sealed containment doors, these spores drift into their victims, replicating within them to eat them alive from the inside out. This has had dramatic effects when small stealth creatures of Hive Fleet Gorgon have managed to infiltrate agri-worlds, the food grown there being shipped off-world, rife with these deadly spores and dispersed into the neighbouring systems. Also known as the Great Serpent, Hive Fleet Jormungandr takes to battle via the earth rather than from the sky. Favouring tunnelling techniques, they burrow their way deep beneath their prey, bursting up from the ground like a volcano of rampaging flesh, their claws dragging through the dirt and into their unsuspecting victims. When the fleet arrives near their next target world, they do not immediately invade. Instead, they hurl large rocks and asteroids at the planet's surface. Whilst those that they face believe this to be simple orbital bombardments, these stones carry a unique payload: broods of Raveners, Morlocks and Trigons. Those who survive impact burrow into the earth and begin carving out nests to grow their new invasion force. When the time comes to strike, the planet is attacked from above and below, and try as they might to rid themselves of this Tyranid threat, there always remains the chance that one of these monsters lie deeper beneath the dirt, patiently waiting for a second opportunity to devour those above. There are times, however, such as fighting the Necrons or Demons, where there is no reward of fresh biomass for defeating their foes. Hive Fleet Kronos is an example of the Tyranids' ability to adapt to this complete change of fighting, the Tyranids no longer being able to restore their numbers lost by devouring their enemies. Kronos doesn't exhibit the same ferocity in their advance that other Hive fleets do, instead showing something akin to caution as they approach, their shadow in the warp presence greater than usual. Focusing on ranged attacks and artillery strikes, Kronos also enjoy an additional benefit to their stronger shadow. As this presence passes over their prey, it begins to drain the life energy from them, bringing it into the strength of the hive mind. This serves to bolster the invigorated shadow, as well as empower the fleet's psykers. Whilst it has been known for Hive Fleet Kronos to fight seemingly alongside others to defeat the forces of chaos, the Tyranids are simply targeting the main threat, before then turning onto whatever unfortunate people happen to be fighting chaos as well, converting their mistaken allies into replacements for lost Tyranid bodies. A recently arrived fleet, and one that is often mistaken for a smaller threat, is Hive Fleet Hydra. Following in the wake of the more prominent and destructive fleets, Hydra picks up the scraps left behind by their predecessors, devouring defeated Tyranids and those who fought them just the same. The ships of this fleet are capable of housing large stores of biomass and are able to convert it to produce or awaken hordes of soldiers on demand. This leaves Hydra with a relatively small footprint until they see the opportunity to strike and reveal their full force onto the unsuspecting target. When they arrive at a planet, they invade with this same sort of preparation, littering the sky above with Tyranids, a biological drop pod, filled with Tyranid warriors. Where their ground forces meet resistance, these pods drop down into the fight, strategically deploying their forces only where necessary, making each pound of biomass count. In a very true sense of their name, when you cut off one head of the Hydra, a Tyranid full of heads arrives to take their place. All of these different tactics, techniques, and Tyranid fleets make for a difficult fight for any who find themselves defending against an invasion. Even if you were able to identify a fleet and know what their main methods of attacking are, the Tyranids' habit of adapting means that you're never really sure what you're facing. With numerous more Hive fleets than what we've discussed today, and variations on all of those from their various splinter fleets, the Tyranid Hive fleets each pose a unique and powerful threat to any who have the misfortune of having to defend against one. Currently, I'm painting up some Tyranids of my own in a variation of Hive Fleet Leviathan. As a Blood Angels player, I've always had a preference for Leviathan, and with so much history and story between these two factions, it was hard not to paint them Leviathan. I'm also hoping that with the Hive Fleet being in the spotlight for the start of 10th edition, we're going to see what's become of the fleet, as well as what's happened to those Tyranids who were lost to the Great Rift. But let me know in the comments if I've missed out your favourite Hive fleet, or if you've got a custom fleet of your own making with some cool lore that you've made for it. If you've enjoyed this video though, consider clicking that like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us to continue what we're doing. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.